Forms are everywhere. You will almost always have to include a form or form function in your projects. A form has a client-server relationship where the client is the form or what a user interacts with, while the server is what and where the data from the form is sent to, stored, and retrieved. Pretty much storage. NextJS lets developers handle both client and server-side development. In this video, I will show you how to build a form with NextJS, React Hook Forms, and Yep. I will also be showing you how to send data to an API endpoint using NextJS. Let's get started. We're going to create a new Next.js project and build a basic HTML form for our contact form submissions. In the terminal, and I'm doing this in my code editor, you want to use the command yarn create next app. I'm going to name the project next form. Okay, now that the project has been created, I want to change directory into that next form folder. And then I'm going to put in the command yarn dev to start the development server and go to the localhost command, or excuse me, the localhost path to start that server or to view it in the browser. Okay, cool. So this is what we should see if the project has been created successfully. Now what we're going to do is actually remove some of the context within the project that we don't need, specifically the details in the index.js file. So we can go ahead and pretty much delete everything. We can remove all of these imports. And just to have something to return to the browser, let's add a welcome. All right, so that is working. In the API folder, this is an example of how to create a basic API within Next.js. We don't need it, so I'm gonna delete it. Yes. Okay, now that we have our project folder structured pretty much how I want, for now we're gonna add a new page to the pages folder named contact.js. And for a more in-depth tutorial on pages and how they work, you can check out my Build a Portfolio and Blog with Next.js video. However, moving along, inside of this file, we will create a functional component for our HTML form. So we're going to start with export default. And we're going to name the function contact, since it's a contact form that we're creating. And we want to return that HTML form. So we're starting with the form tag, and we're going to add the attribute action and set that to route to home for now. And we're also going to give the form the attribute method of post. And what this means is that for the action, this is where the form data is going to be posted to, or is going to go. And post is where post is the method or the HTTP method we want to use. And for forms like contact, it will usually be post to submit or add data to our server storage. Okay, so inside of that form, we want to add our input fields. We're gonna have about 4 of them. So we need an input field for first name, last name, email, and message. For this one, which will be for first name, I'm gonna give it the type of text, ID equals first, name equals first. in quotes. Okay, and now I'm gonna copy and paste this 3 more times for our other fields. So this will be for last name. This will be for email, so we'll change the input type to email. And then this last one, we'll change the text area because it is going to be for a message that the user wants to send. Okay, so now let's import that contact form into our index.js file. Contact. Okay, and right now we don't see anything, but these are the fields that we created. We can actually add some labels for now. We'll end up removing them, but it'll help us see what's going on with our form as far as what we have. Okay, so these are the 4 fields we will be using for our contact form. We also need, there's no way to submit, so we need a button. We're going to give it the type of submit because this will be our submission button. Submit. All right, there we go. So we have our basic HTML form set up. Now we can begin our client-side validation using React Hook Form. React Hook Form is a library that allows us to quickly and easily add form validation to our projects without having to create custom JavaScript validation or using regular expressions. It does it all for us. If you'd like to learn more, you can find the link to reacthookform.com and its quick start guide in the description below. So first, to get started, we need to install React Hook Form. And we are going to do this with yarn add. So first, let's make sure we are in the correct folder. So next form, great. And we're gonna use the command yarn add React Hook Form. Okay, so let me just make sure we've added that dependency. Okay, great. It added to our project correctly. So now back in our contact.js form, we are going to add our validation. And one of the first things we want to do is import React from React. And next we want to import the use form module from React Hook Form. I keep wanting to type from. It's very annoying. Okay, and we can save that. Okay, so now inside of our functional component, we are going to define register, handle submit, and form state as the methods we want to access from the use form hook. So destructuring assignment. And that will look like this, declaring the variable. And like I said, we want to get register, handle, submit, form state with the object errors. And I think that's it from the use form hook. Oops. So that's inside. Okay. And then the next thing we want to do is define what we want the form to do when it's submitted. And for now, what we're gonna have it do is to just console log the data. So first, we are again gonna declare a variable, and we're gonna call it on submit equals data equals console log data. Okay, save. All right, so now back in our form, we need to add another attribute called onSubmit. And when we add the onSubmit attribute to the form tag, what we're doing is we want it to execute the handle submit function that will then execute the nested onSubmit function we created when the user submits their form entry. Okay, and we're actually going to make some changes to the form fields. So we're going to remove the labels for aesthetics and use placeholders instead. And we also need to register our input fields or supply the field names to the hook in order to apply validation rules, both HTML standard and custom. So first, let's remove all of these labels. Okay, and what we need to do is add that placeholder attribute. And I'm going to have the first placeholder say first name. Let's save. Okay, that's what I want. I'm going to copy that. I don't want to type placeholder. Okay, nice. All right, and we save that. Okay, so the syntax or structure of how we add registration is, so inside of that input field, we're gonna put it after first name. What we need is curly braces, register, and inside of parentheses, we're going to give the name of the input. So instead of having name, we're going to actually remove that. We can keep ID first, and we're going to put the name of the input field here. And I'm just going to, call it first name instead now. And then after you give the field a name or register the field name, this is where you add your validation requirements in another set of curly braces. So this will be required, and we want that to be true. We are just gonna set max length to 80, and we're done. So that is going to be pretty much the structure for all of the fields. So let's just do it for the next three. First, we register, and we give the field a name. This will be last name. And now we set our requirements or our validation requirements. And we can take this out. This will be email. Required true pattern. And this is a little bit of regular expression for the email pattern. Actually, that's right. Okay. All right, and then we just need to do message. And for this one, we only need it to be required. All right, and we're gonna save. I is not defined. Where did I put a random I? Okay, my pattern is off. Email. Pattern, what is wrong with it? Okay. And also I did not create this specifically on my own. I'm not well versed with regular expressions. I've used it before, but it's still just not my forte. So the cool thing is that let's say you do have a field where you need a little bit of help trying to figure out how to set up the validation requirements that you want. React.js actually has a form builder, and that will help you speed up your development, and it will also allow you, again, more control over the form validations that you would like to create, and you can create custom form validation. Okay, let's see what happens when we click submit. Okay, we see nothing is happening, and actually that is a good thing. That means that the form will not submit unless these required parameters are met. We'll know that the form successfully submitted when we look in the console and the data is logged. So let's go ahead and add some data to our input fields. I'm using the Chrome extension fake filler to test out our form by applying dummy data. So go ahead and click that. We're also going to open up the console in the browser to see what we get returned. So now that we have data in our input fields, let's click submit. And now we know that the form is actually working correctly, as well as our form validation. So now we just need to move on to error handling so that we can actually see visually when a requirement is not met. Now that we have the client-side validation piece complete, we can add our error handling. This is where we're going to use that foreign state errors object that we defined earlier to show errors in the form when a user submits. Under your input field, inside of the contact.js file, under your input fields is where we are going to add our error handlers. So the error handling can be as complex or as simple as you would like. We're going to keep it simple, and it's pretty much just adding some conditional logic. So we're going to start off with our curly braces, and we're going to type errors. So we're going to reference that object, and we're going to reference the name of the input field that we registered. And then we are going to follow that with 2 ampersands, so denoting and our message. And this one is just, if it's missing, we're gonna put first name required. So what is this doing? This is one, checking to see that first name, or whether first name is listed as a field within the error object. And if it is, we will also render the first name required message. And we're going to do something similar for all three, or excuse me, all four. We're actually going to add the same type of error handling. Again, in your project, you can get as you probably want to get more complex than this to check for length and patterns, or to display error messages for lengths and patterns that aren't meeting the requirements. But for the sake of this tutorial and to keep it pretty short, we're gonna just keep it at if the field is missing an input. This is the last name. Okay, and we see we already have those error messages popping up for this form. I think because we have some residual submission left over. So let's click submit, and we see that these two pop up. The two other error messages are not, and I think it's because I don't have the register name correct. I have to have it capitalized. So if I click save, there we go. We get these other error messages. Submit. So yeah, let's fill it out and see if we get the same thing. No. And if we go back to check our console again, we should see our submission. Okay. Let's just do it one more time, clear it out. Let's just refresh the page, submit, and we get our error messages. So right now, everything looks a little weird, but for now, we'll leave it how it is. And since we have completed our error handling, our very simple error handling, we can now move on to schema validation, and we're going to use the yup library to help us do that. Okay, so we've seen how to do client-side validation with React Hook Form. Now we want to go a little bit further and show you how to do validation or client-side validation with schema validation. And I'm going to be doing this using the yup YUP library. So yup is a JavaScript schema builder that can be used for validating form data to make sure that the input matches the model or patterns we require. And we can use it or integrate it in with our React Hook form. So the first thing we need to do is install our dependencies, which will be a resolver as well, a resolver library, as well as the actual yup library. So let's go ahead with yarn add at hook form resolvers yup. Okay, let's check the console, let's check the package JSON. There's our resolver dependency and our yup, so that's good and installed into our project correctly. So now we need to import the modules that we need. So the first one is yup resolver. from Yep. The next one is all the modules from the Yep export. So asterisk as Yep from Yep. Okay. Now that we have our imports, we need to actually define our schema. So we're going to declare a variable and just call it schema, which will actually be a Yep object. And inside of this object, that's where we're going to list our inputs as well as the requirements that they have. So as far as the naming for our properties within that object, we need it to be the exact name of each of the input fields we registered. So if it's lowercase, camel case, or if it's capitalized at the beginning, it needs to match exactly. So for first name, we're going to add first. And what we're going to do is we're going to chain methods together that Yep provides for us to set up our schema for validation. And first we're going to start with the string method. And to that, for first name, we're going to chain required since we have that as a required field below. And we're also going to chain max because we have it below as we want the max length to be 80. And inside of that, we're going to put 80. And that's pretty much it. I'm going to copy and paste this because it's going to be very similar for the other fields. However, email is going to be a little different. So last name, I think this was 100 was the max length. Email, and then message. Okay, message, we can remove max length. We just want it to be required. For email, what we're going to do is just chain an email method provided by Yep. So it'll do those regular expressions for us. We don't have to come up with a pattern. I'm going to save it. And that's good. So now we also need to add the Yep resolver to our use form hook with the schema as a parameter. And what this does, it just allows for seamless integration of Yep with React hook form. So in curly braces, we're going to add resolver, Yep resolver, and schema. And I forgot to add, right after setting up the object, we need to add required as well for the entire object. So let's actually format this document a little bit. Okay. And we're going to save. All right, so now that we have all of that set up, we're gonna have to change our form a little bit. Specifically, we need to remove these requirements. We don't actually need them anymore. We just need to register the field. You can keep them if you wanna add or keep those custom messages, but we don't necessarily need them at this point. So okay, so I'm gonna save that because we have our requirements here at the top now. And as far as the error, so we're gonna change our error messages. So by default, Yep will add messages to the error objects for each property based on the validation parameters we chose. So we don't have to manually create them unless we want to add custom messages. So let's go ahead and look in the console to see what I'm talking about. And for us to actually see what's going on, let's console log errors. Okay, so let's try to submit the form. Did I save it? Yeah. And if we look at the errors object, we now have a message property where we can pull from for this. So instead of having this message, what we're going to do is we're going to chain message to the first parameter. Okay, so now the error won't be what we originally had. It would be the default message. Let's go to first name. That's what I'm trying to see. It'll be that default message that was created by the Yelp library. So if you don't need some type of specific or custom message, this is just an easy, quick way to get your form up and running and to create validation. So we're going to do the same thing for the rest of the error messages. Okay. All right, so now we see that all of those default messages are added. Let's go ahead and fill out the form. And now we get an object that's empty. Everything is filled out as it should be, so we don't get any errors in our error object. Now, what if we decided to change the max length to, let's say, 3? What would happen? So let's go ahead and submit this again, and we do get an error now in our errors object, and it's first name, and first name must be at most 3 characters. That is our default message, which is what we wanted to see because the max length is only 3. But it shows you that depending on your validation requirements, the message property will change in reference to the validation or the requirement that wasn't met. So it's a pretty cool out of the box way to do schema validation on the client side, and it again saves you a little bit of development time if you don't need to make custom messages. And pretty much that's it for the schema validation. So let's go ahead and move on to form submissions with API routes and a redirect to a thank you page. Now we can set up our server by creating an API endpoint with Next.js for where to send the form data. We're going to create our API endpoint in the API folder, and files in this folder are treated as an API endpoint. So let's say we create a file called forms.js in the folder. The endpoint would be localhost 3000 /API/forms. So let's go ahead and create that API file, and we're gonna name it formdata.js. Okay, so now in this file we need to create a handler function with a request and response parameter. So export default function handler is what we're gonna name it. REQ and RES, one for request and one for response, and that's that. So REQ or request is the request we are making of our data, like getting the body of the data that's submitted, and response is the server response we want to return depending on the outcome of the request. So let's say the request is successful, we will want it to return 200 for okay with maybe a custom message. Now the next thing we need to do inside of the handler is create a variable for our request, and it is going to be a request for the body content. So we're going to initiate a variable const body, and we're going to use REQ since it's a request for the body information, or the information from the body of the form submission. All right, so now let's go ahead and add some conditional logic. But before that, we can also just add a console log of the body, so that kind of as another check to make sure that the post request is actually working how we are expecting it to work. So body, so if we get the body or the content of the body in a log, we know that the request is able to access the form data. So body, comma, body. When we submit the form, we should see that in our log. Okay, and like I said, we're going to add some conditional logic for when the request is successful and when it's not. And for us, a successful form submission and for testing purposes is if we have both the first and last name. So if it's missing, it's not successful, and we want to submit or return a response that tells us it's not successful or whether it is. So if body dot first name, or if body last name is missing, then we want to return the response status of 400. Okay, with a message data first or last name not found. Now let's say it is successful. What we want is a response with the status of 200, also returning data, but we wanted to return the values for first and last name. Okay. All right, so now we need to go back into our contact.js file, and we have to make a couple of changes. And the first one we need to do is make changes to our onSubmit function. So we're gonna delete this. Okay, what we want to do first is use the fetch method to send our data to the endpoint. So we're going to put in fetch, and the first parameter that's required is the path of the endpoint, which would be our API endpoint form data, and we can leave it at that absolute endpoint as form data. And the second parameter are our options. So in that parameter, we need to add the options for method, headers, and body. Okay, so this will be method, and our method is post. Headers will be content type application / JSON, and the last one is body, JSON.stringify data. Oops. Okay, and we're going to save that. Okay, and then we also, in this function, we want to add an alert. And this is, again, just another way to make sure that our post request is happening as it should. So if the post request is happening in our alert, we will see the user submission's first name in that alert. That tells us that we were able to pull that first name from the data because it was posted to our server or to our storage. Okay, so I think that's good so far. So The normal behavior without doing this, and let's say we just added the endpoint here in our actions attribute, is that the form would submit without the validation being complete, and that's what we don't want. We want the form to go through the validation step and then submit and post to the server. So this allows for that to happen. Another thing we need to do is we need to remove these two attributes from our forms. We don't need that anymore because we are setting up the logic here in our onSubmit function. So let's go ahead and save that. And also we need to add the names attribute to each field because that is what our API function is referencing. So it's just going to be the same as what we registered with React hook form. And I'm going to actually copy and paste this for all of the inputs. You know what? Actually, yeah, no, it should be fine. Okay, let's go back to the browser. I just want to make sure. Okay, this is still working as it should. Okay, there's an issue. I think it has, oh, everything is first name. That is a, that's a problem. So last name, the email, message. All right, so let's refresh this, fill this out. Okay, so now it's working again like it should. Okay. And also we see that our submission to the API endpoint is working because our alert box popped up, but it also popped up with the first name, meaning that it was able to pull from the server to get the first name in order to populate. And this is exactly what we want. Now, what we don't want is to just be sitting here on this screen or whatnot. So we can actually add a redirect to the page so that once a user submits, it actually redirects them to a thank you page. So the first thing we need to do is create that thank you page in our pages folder. I'm just going to call it thank you.js. Default function, just call it the function thanks. Return div thank you. I'm gonna save that, and now we can close this out. And back in our contact.js form, we need to import NextJS router or use router function. So let's go ahead and do that. Import from next, I think it's router. Okay, so we can go ahead and initiate a variable to access the use router function and its methods, and we're just going to call the variable router and set it equal to use router. Okay, and down in our onSubmit function, we are going to use the push method with this router variable, and that way once the user submits, it will go through the validation piece. If successfully posted to the API endpoint, we'll see the alert box, and once you close out that box, it will redirect the user to the thank you page. So that just looks like router.push thank you slash thank you, and we save. I'm gonna do one more document formatting, save it again. So let's go ahead and add or try to submit a form. We still have the 3-character limit on the name, so let's go ahead and submit. Our data was successfully pushed to the API endpoint, and also we see the body information here in our console log, which is what we wanted to see when it's successful, and we click OK, and now we're routed to the thank you page, which is exactly what we wanted. Now that we have finished building our form, setting up validation, creating our API endpoints, and also our redirect, you can go ahead and style the form and pages to your heart's desire, as well as you should be able to incorporate this form and those validation points, as well as the API endpoint concept, into any project that you will want to use this for. In this video, we learned how to handle both client and server-side development using Next.js. We were also introduced to 2 extremely helpful libraries, React Hook Form and Yup for client-side validation. Be sure to comment down below what other topics you want to see videos on, and make sure you subscribe. As always, thanks for watching, and until next time.